Invested savings would say
I call the Honourable Rick Barker.
Mr Chairman, I want to take a call in this debate and say the National Party should hang their head in shame over this piece of legislation. But it's entirely consistent with the philosophy, the practice and the orthodoxy of the National Party. Cut, chop and gut. The National Party, as Mr Nash has reminded us, chopped into the superannuation savings scheme put in by Labor in the 1970s. The National Party railed against it then on the grounds that that national superannuation scheme was put in place by Norman Kirk would buy up New Zealand. That's what they said, and you couldn't have Kiwis owning New Zealand. That these superannuation schemes got so big, their funds could buy up New Zealand, and New Zealanders were owning their own history, and you could not have that. So Muldoon got rid of it. He got rid of it on the basis of a canard. The canard was that New Zealand could continue to afford out of taxation to pay people at 80% of the ordinary average wage from the age 60 until they passed on. Every newspaper editor in New Zealand knew that was a lie. Everybody knew that it was a lie, but Muldoon sold it on the basis that he would give back to every person their personal contributions and the employer's contributions. And I have to say, Mr Chairman, I was at work in those days, I was in the scheme, and people in the place I worked out had figured out that if they got their contributions and the boss's contributions, they could buy a new stove, they could buy a new fridge, they could buy a new something else, and they had all spent the money. So when the National Party was elected in 1975, Muldoon, off his own motion, stopped contributions and was taken to the High Court and the Court of Appeal and was found to be the only person who had acted ultra vires as a Prime Minister. A landmark decision which is read all over the world, that he took away and exercised the power of this Parliament of his own hand. The court found him wrong, but the court didn't make him change the legislation because they knew that he had the power to change it, but they said he was wrong. And he wasn't only wrong constitutionally, legally, he was wrong morally. If that superannuation scheme had stood, we would not have had to sell the Bank of New Zealand because the superannuation scheme could have bought it itself. We would not have to have sold many other assets because the superannuation scheme could have bought them and owned them. And more importantly, Mr Chairman, the New Zealand superannuation scheme could have been buying assets all over the world to make New Zealand a richer country. Instead, what we have, the legacy of Sir Robert Muldoon and the National Party.
Point of order, the Honourable Member, Michael Woodhouse.
Mr Speaker, this is all very interesting, but it certainly doesn't go to the title of the bill, and I wonder if the member could be brought back to that.
Well, thank you for drawing that to my attention, but the member actually has a right to refute debate. I'm sure that he will actually come to the bill very shortly. I call the Honourable Member.
Mr Chairman, I think that's a sign that the National Party finds us very uncomfortable to tell their history to them, because the history of the National Party on superannuation is dismal, grim and a legacy of shame. So what happened because we didn't have the superannuation scheme? Instead, Australian superannuation schemes come to New Zealand, bought up our banks and bought up all the rest of it because we did not save. But having made such a travesty out of that, the National Party then go on and commit a further one. It was in the superannuation scheme. They went to the election and said, no ifs, no buts, no babies. We will not put a superannuation surcharge on superannuation funds. And what happened? They not only put it on, they put it up. And so people said there's a complete and utter disincentive to save for your retirement, because when you do, when you save for your retirement, the government is going to tax it off you. And this caused a proliferation of trusts for people to hide and shelter their income and get it away from taxation. This is what was happened there. Now, the third travesty that's going to be inflicted upon... The Chair wants us to speak to me. The Chair will speak to me directly by taking his feet and making the call. But then I'm just going to say, in this piece of legislation, the Taxation Annual Rates Budget Measures Bill, in this piece of legislation is the third crime against superannuation in New Zealand. The third crime against superannuation in New Zealand caused by the National Party, following its philosophy of cut, gut and chop. That's their philosophy. Whatever they can get hold of, cut it, chop it, get rid of it. That's what they're going to do to our legacy from our grandparents. Our grandparents built dams all over this country as a gift to the next generation. They're going to sell them off so they can go and spend it. That's what they're going to do. And that's a part of the National Party's chop. And they're going to chop into superannuation again. Mr Chairman.
I call the honourable member